From the National Christian Foundation in San Diego, I'm Kim Moeller, and this is the Generous Girl Podcast, a show that shares inspirational stories about generosity through faith, family, finances, fitness, and friendships, as well as deep thoughts about what matters most and practical tips. My guests are all amazing women who have overcome adversity and are big believers in hope and in maximizing their time, their talents, and their treasures, and making their lives count. So we're so happy that you're here. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Hi, welcome to the Generous Girl Podcast. It is thrilling to have everybody here again, and I have a favorite guest today named Cheri Shank. And I just would love to tell you a little bit about Cheri before you get to meet her on the podcast. Generosity is a core value for Cheri and her husband, Bob. And they have 2 kids, 6 grandkids, and they just live a life of kingdom impact and service. She's a native of Southern California. She visited South Africa in 2004 and was deeply impacted by the work of Acres of Love, which rescues orphan children into the love and dignity of family. And she's a strong advocate for this work, and she has taken and invited over 75 American women and their families to purchase and fully fund 5 family homes in Johannesburg and Cape Town. And she continues to lead yearly vision trips and introduce new women to tangible ways of living and faith-filled generosity. And she has taught and mentored the master's program here in Orange County for many, many years. So welcome, Cheri. And again, I just can't wait for people to get to know you. You have been just a real hero to me, and we can explain more about how we got to know each other. But let's start with you telling a little bit more about your background, where you grew up, how you met your husband, and how you landed in, the area where you're living now.
Well, we haven't gone far from where we both started. We were both born in Orange County and, believe it or not, met in 8th grade, American history class. And really didn't start dating until between our junior and senior year of high school. But the rest is history.
Wow.
We have married for 52 years.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, we have 2 incredible daughters with really wonderful sons-in-law. I couldn't be more happy with our sons-in-law too. But the best part is we have 6 grandchildren from 25 to 12. The oldest grandson is getting married in about a month. So that is, I know, so exciting. I mean, it's just the last 25 years have gone by so quickly. But they all live really close. We even all attend the same church.
Wow.
We've been super involved grandparents, and it's been just a great joy. We're really spoiled to have our kids live so close and the grandkids stay so close.
Well, it's a gift. It's definitely a gift that if it works out for people, it's fabulous. And then I know people that have 4 kids and none of them live at home in their state, and they fly and go see them, and that works too. It's sort of like, okay, Lord, like, how do you want our family unit to operate? But definitely it would be #goals for me to have all of my kids in this area. So, okay, one thing I really, really love about you and Bob is your intentionality. And I feel like you analyze and look at every aspect of your life and try to really live intentionally for the kingdom. And the reason I thought of you and interviewing you on this podcast is because we do talk about those 5 areas of faith, family, friendships, fitness, and faith. Oh, no, I said faith. Wait, faith, family, fitness, friendships, and family. And you resonate in my mind with the faith side of things for sure, and the friendships because of what you've done through the master's program. So that is really how you and I got to know each other. And my husband, Carl, got to know your husband through the master's program and the Barnabas Group. But the master's program is a phenomenal organization that has such an impact on people. And like I said, has a huge impact on my life. So I would love for you to tell the listeners more about how that came to be, your role in it, and the fruit that you've seen from the master's program.
Wow. Well, we go back 25, 30 years, And my husband was, I'll try to be brief. It's such a long story, so I'll try to be,
It's okay.
but 25, almost 30 years ago, my husband decided to transition from business into full-time ministry. And he had such a heart for men in a business who, back then, there were no men's ministries at churches, and at least not that we were aware of locally here. And he had such a heart for guys who were really successful in their careers, but were often, most cases, sacrificing some other really major facet in their life, whether it be their health, whether it be their family, whether it be their marriage, their parenting. They're continuing to grow, and obviously, the faith component. And the master's program started with Bob taking men through what developed into a 3-year kind of mentoring program, helping men find some balance and some margin and some focus in life, and ultimately discovering their unique kingdom calling. That's putting 3 years of a program into like two
Right.
sentences.
Right.
And after that got started, there were wives of these men in the program saying, wait a minute, I want to learn what they're learning. Why can't we do that? And so, I had, my kids weren't that old at the time, and yet I jumped in and said, well, I can do that. I'm always saying I can do that, and I don't know that I really can. But I jumped in on faith and started teaching Bob's material that was designed for men, but teaching it from a woman's perspective and helping women discover
Right.
that they will not always be changing diapers. They will not always be driving carpool, that the day will come when their midlife crisis occurs, which is normally when the last one heads off to college.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they going to do with the rest of their life? God designed them for something more, not to just sit back and play tennis the rest of their life, but to do something that can make a real impact. And so I have had the opportunity for the last 25 years to be teaching and mentoring and discipling women and helping them discover what their unique kingdom calling is too. And oftentimes it is compatible with and partnering with something their husband loves to do. And quite often it's not. It's doing something uniquely different with the great support from their husbands.
Right.
And I've always felt that there's no stopping a power couple that really understands what God has created them to be and to do, and the impact that they can make on their marriage and their family and their community and in the kingdom is just unstoppable.
I 100% agree. And I feel like the master's program helps you just to have a framework in your mind so that it doesn't feel like a cliff when the last child leaves home, but you've been sort of putting the pieces into this framework or paradigm during the years prior to that. It reminds me of years ago, my husband and I went to a parenting conference, and they had a bullseye target, like you were shooting arrows at it. And they asked us, like, which arrows are you shooting to the target, and how will you even know in the way you're raising your kids if you'll hit the target? Because if you don't have a target, you won't even know if you've hit it once you've done that. And I feel like the same with the master's program. Like, so many times as women, we are the ones just doing all those things. I mean, one time I was in 10 carpools at one time. And I don't know how I didn't leave someone's kid or my kid somewhere, but you are maxed, in those years. And you're not thinking about what is my 2-word purpose statement and where, but we should be, because then it's like, okay, even though the carpools were fun and I'm an extrovert and all the, the craziness of soccer carpools with the boys, etc., it's still good to really know who we are, who God made us, what is our calling, and how can we, because when we're living according to that purpose, it's just so much more life-giving. And I think that's one of the reasons I love this podcast. My 2-word purpose statement is encouraging significance. So I love to encourage significance in the different people that I come across, because I feel like we each have this unique reason we've been put here, and no one can fill those shoes. Nobody can
Right.
step into our calling. And, your marriage is unique. And like you said, a power couple, the two things that you both bring together as a couple. If you're single listening, your unique calling as well, and what God wants to do through you that he can't do through other people. So it's so important that we grasp that. And I just thank you for the work that you put into the master's program. And the other loveliness of it was, I remember your daughter, who was such a baker, who would bake those lovely, treats and things. And we would get to go to your house just, a few times a year to experiencing that. And with having young kids, that was such a joy. And like to have somebody else do that for me was like, thank you. I'm so grateful. So grateful. So, okay. Another thing I want to touch on here is the generosity component that you alluded to, and I read about in your bio, because I know you have something called 3Gen, 4Gen. And tell the listeners what that is about. Because again, this goes with your intentionality and the way you and Bob are so strategic. So I think you'll really encourage people when they hear.
Yeah, those are two great words, intentional and strategic. I really do feel like Bob and I have tried desperately to be very intentional and strategic when it comes to almost every facet of our life, but definitely the family, and definitely when it comes to generosity. We have always said that we've wanted our family to be known for a family that is grateful and a family that is generous. And one of the ways that we've always tried to model for our kids how we're generous when it comes to kingdom investing, and how we wanted to model that for them. But this year in particular, we decided to even take it a step further. We've always talked about, we wanted our kids to know where our money was going when it came to kingdom investments.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our NCF giving fund. And this year, doing something a little different, we were blessed with an investment return that we wanted to go all of it into the kingdom, and decided that we would do this 3Gen, 4Gen project. It's a family project. It's 3 generations, 4 generosity. So Bob and I, first generation, our kids and their husbands, second generation, the grandkids, a third generation. And so we allotted each of them funds that obviously much more substantial for the second generation than the first generation, but quite substantial for what they were used to. That these funds they would each, they have their own individual project, because they each get to find a ministry, a kingdom investment that they would like to make. So looking at the world, having a real Christian broad worldview, seeing what God is doing all around the world, finding where their hearts were really passionate about something in particular, and being willing to take those funds and send it to that ministry. Even though it's coming from our NCF giving fund, it will be given in their name, and then they will be the ones that will be hearing back from that ministry, seeing the fruit from that ministry, being able to report back to our family project what God's doing through that ministry, allowing them to see the difference between a kingdom investment and humanitarian investment. And we want them to see God at work, and we want them to put these funds where God is at work, and then ultimately experiencing the joy of giving, which of course this goes beyond their normal tithe. This won't replace their tithe.
Right.
It's been so exciting just to see how excited the kids were. We were all together just last week for Bob's birthday. And one of the topics that came up is who's been doing their research, what ministry.
Right.
And the 12-year-old was one of the first to jump in and say, this is where I want mine to go. I learned about this ministry,
Wow.
and this is really cool, and this is the reason why. And so I want my money to go there. And so just to see them excited about giving,
Yes.
and then we'll be able to receive and sense the real joy when they see the fruit that comes from that is part of our intentionality when it comes to teaching and being a role model for our children when in generosity.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Cheri. It just brings so many things to my mind when you're talking, because in my role with NCF California San Diego, I come across the most incredible people who lead these nonprofits, and they all have their stories of how they were called to work in whatever, that ministry is that God's called them to. And on the NCF platform, we have over 70,000 ministries that people can give to. And so really, for the listener who doesn't know what a giving fund is, it's just simple, just ncfgiving.com/open. And you go there and set up the account, and all of the contributions then that you want to give to your church or to these local areas, or maybe they're not local, maybe, it's a global organization, but you can do that through NCF. And that's the fun part of the generosity piece, is you see the collected 70,000 organizations and all the various things that people want, the problems in the world they're trying to solve, and the kingdom generosity that flows through the platform. I mean, since 1982, over $16 billion has gone to these organizations. And it's wonderful. And I love exposing, like you said, that third generation to the joy of giving, and, to their own little impact. That story of you can save the one starfish, and that one starfish is touched. And maybe someone has $100 that they're giving, maybe someone has $1 million, but either way, God can just multiply the effects of that gift and that generosity. And we sponsored a couple of kids with compassion over the years when our kids were growing up, but I don't think I did a good enough job of involving the kids in the child's life, and, writing more letters and everything. And all of a sudden those kids that we supported were 18, and it was done. And I look back, and I think it was probably because of the driving the 10 car rules. It was a little crazy, but I feel like I could have involved them more that way. So, maybe with the grandkids, we'll do a little reset on that and do something like what you're doing. I love that. So, okay. The other topic I also really always try to touch upon on this podcast is a story where you feel like God helped you to overcome adversity. Because again, the goal of this podcast is to encourage the listener in, those areas we're talking about, of friendships or family, faith. How can they take the next step? And someone might be listening to this podcast and they're on cloud 9 right now and life is going great, but then someone else is listening and it's really, really a tough season. And I know that you and Bob walked through a very, very tough season after Bob received a very unexpected health diagnosis in January of 22. So I'd love for you to share what you feel comfortable sharing about what you walked through, and really the impact it had on you as the wife, the caregiver, because I know that I thought of you as the unsung hero, because I knew he couldn't have gotten to where he got to without the support of a wife like you, just devoting everything you had to, get him through it.
When you are faced with something like that, and anybody who's listening who's faced a cancer diagnosis, ooh, I might get teary
It's
already.
okay.
Sorry.
I can't give you Kleenex through the
No,
laptop, so I wish I could.
but my husband was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia 18 months ago, and one's life comes to a dead halt, and the focus is completely on this battle that one is fighting. And we spent the last 18 months in and out of the hospital. My husband needed a stem cell bone marrow transplant. They could not find one in the whole international database. And at the very last moment, it turned out that two of our grandchildren were half matches, one a tad stronger. And so right before, and this goes to generosity too, the week before, and he was the week before we found a match.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting weaker and weaker, and all sorts of chemotherapy treatments. I can't even remember how many weeks and series of chemo he went through, and then the radiation that happened right before the transplant.
Wow.
But when we thought there was no hope, no transplant available, one of the things that Bob did was make sure that all of his donation commitments and even beyond were current, because he really felt that, oh, I hate the ugly cry face, I'm so sorry.
You're so
But
fine.
he really wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that that was taken care of before he went back into the hospital again.
Mm-hmm.
And which really told me a lot about his heart,
Mm-hmm.
and that it really that sense of the value of generosity was so huge.
Mm-hmm.
He was at his deepest point in the valley of the shadow of death, and yet he was still thinking about what he could do for the kingdom. And anyway, and then everything turned around. He still felt horrible, but we had a donor, and it turned out to be our 17-year-old granddaughter, who was so
Amazing.
thrilled.
Yeah.
Little tiny skinny thing,
Yeah.
and gave more than twice as many stem cells as Bob needed. So even some of those are frozen in case he should
Yeah.
need them.
Wow.
And and after a transplant, you always feel so much worse, but things were looking positive. It's been over a year now since his transplant. He is in complete remission.
Mm.
They never use the word healed at City of Hope, but he is in remission, and we're so, so hopeful, and we are so grateful
Yeah.
for the favor that God chose to give our family. We saw through that whole process just some amazing things that God taught us. The first was the power of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Was off the charts. The people who were praying from, I mean, all over the world, everybody was, it was like this ripple effect of prayer. And the people who were sending incredibly encouraging and loving and supportive notes. The the people who were saying, I believe in miracles now. I didn't believe in miracles. My faith was starting to think, is this real or not? And yet watching Bob go through the process showed them that you stand firm in your faith, which Bob always did, which is interesting. I was constantly praying for a miracle
Yeah.
for the last 18 months. Bob never prayed for a miracle. He was praying that God would be glorified, because he's so much more spiritual than I am. I was praying for the miracle. I'm so sorry. But
Well, this
but
other thing, and I don't mean to cut you off, but with Bob, it's like he was so healthy. He was a runner and in great shape. So I just remember when I saw it on Facebook, or how I was, I can't remember how I was notified, but I thought, Bob Shank, like of all people, you just
oh
literally never know if you're going to get that kind of a diagnosis.
no, you never know. And it is a gut punch at first. But one thing we did learn is just how close God is when you cling to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking of when Jesus was walking across the water, and Peter was watching him and stepped out. But the minute he turned away from Jesus and looked at the
Right.
storm, at the water, he started to sink. And I kept thinking, we just have to keep our eyes on Jesus. If
Mm-hmm.
we keep our eyes on Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and he just was so real to us. I mean, there were moments when I could feel God's presence in the room with us,
Yeah.
when it was so dark and so scary.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost wish that everybody could experience that intimacy with the Lord. Wouldn't want them to have to go through what
Sure.
we went
Sure.
through, but would love for them to just feel how much God loves
Mm-hmm.
us. There's I kept thinking, there's wars all over the world, Lord, and there's horrible things happening, but yet you're right here with us in this hospital room, and you're taking care of every need Bob has. And our story has a happy ending right now so far. But had it not, God wouldn't have been any different. He would have been right there with us to get us through even tougher times
Mhm.
than we
Mhm.
went through last year. So
Mhm.
we, we come out of 18 months feeling closer to the Lord, feeling his presence in a new and fresh way, and just being so very, very grateful. So very grateful. So, as a caregiver, I think you ask, as a caregiver, for any caregivers listening,
Mhm.
I know how hard that is for
Mhm.
you to have to sit back and watch the ones you love the most suffer, and there's not
Yes.
a thing you can do about it except
Right.
encourage and pray and ask God to give them the peace and the comfort and the strength and the courage to endure.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I can I was the voice of hope. Bob
Sure.
would look things
Sure.
up on Google, Google Dr. Med, whatever that one is, and he would give us the statistics of of prognosis, and I would say, don't even listen to that. That's like Job's friends. That doesn't have God in the equation.
Mhm.
No, but he said, I need to be realistic. And I
Mhm.
said, I'm not being realistic. I'm going to be hopeful. And so the voice of hope
Yeah.
is what I've really tried to do this last year.
Ah,
And God is worthy of our hope and our praise for sure.
yes. Oh, Cheri, such a journey, such a time of hills and valleys, and you do hear when people have walked through those types of things that the presence of the Lord, the nearness, like you mentioned, how he's close to the brokenhearted. It is something that those on the outside who aren't walking it cannot experience in the same way. And I have heard people say things like that, like even though it was kind of like, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies, like if they
Yeah,
wouldn't trade it either for what they experienced with God's presence through that process. So for everyone listening, tell us like a few of the tips that you would say for those of us who maybe know someone who's going through a really hard, cancer battle. Give a couple of examples of, wow, when people did this for me as the wife, the caregiver, this really ministered to me. And then there were a few times people said this and it was not the right thing to say. So anything like that that you could share that would be helpful, because I think sometimes obviously people's hearts are there and they just so want to do something, and then in the process they just say, call me if you need something. And you're like, I need 5,000 things. So I've always heard it's better to one person, I love this, they gave 3 suggestions. Which of these would be the best? If I bring you a meal, if I just come over and sit with you, or if I drive Bob to the hospital, for example. And I thought that's kind of a good idea too, just giving that person choices, but offering specific things that they could say yes in. And it's so hard to receive. I mean, it's just so much easier. And you're always the one who's hosting the parties and giving to everybody else. And it's always just so much harder to be on the receiving end of people's love and support.
it is. The night before Bob went into the hospital for the long stay, the family was together for dinner, and I remember telling the grandkids, I said, I just want you to know that people are going to be saying a lot of things. People are going to, what's happening to Babo, the grandkids call him Babo. What's happening to Babo is going to make people think of somebody else they knew who had cancer, and they're going to want to tell you their story, and some of those stories are going to be happy endings and some are going to be sad endings, and I want you kids to just not pay any attention. Know that these people mean well,
Mm-hmm.
and And they don't mean to discourage or to scare, but they honestly mean well, and they're probably kind of processing themselves as they're talking.
Mm-hmm.
But don't listen to them, because God has a completely different plan for Babo, and that there's lots of different cancers and there's lots of
Right.
different everything. Nothing's going to be the same. Everything's going to be different, and we're just going to focus on Jesus and making sure that we're trusting him completely through it all. And so, I people do mean well, and I really feel like the best thing we can tell people is just that we're praying for them.
Mm-hmm.
That is has to be one of the most comforting things for me, to know how many people we're praying.
Right.
And then when I could say, Bob needs blood or Bob needs platelets, I cannot tell you. I mean, the people in the blood donor department were saying, who is this person?
Wow.
Money designated, or money, giving blood
Right.
designated
Right.
for him. And it was just incredible. We had friends who were flying in to Duarte, to City of Hope, to give blood and platelets.
Mm.
We have friends who are coming down, were coming down on a regular basis. As soon as they could give again, they were there. Our church did a huge blood drive. So, I mean, all I said is he needs blood.
And
And
soon.
everybody said that's something I can do. So to be sensitive when you hear the needs,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and to be sensitive to say, what do you need? How can I help? Please, I'll do anything. And so many people said that, and it was so awesome. And what I would say is, we need blood, we need platelets, we need prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And for our situation, those were the really big needs.
Mm-hmm.
But I have since learned, being on the other side, I have since learned that just saying, I'm praying for you,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
It's
here's
power.
this here's this one short verse. There were times when I couldn't even read my Bible. I had to have it in my hand for comfort
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
onto it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't even focus when
Right.
I would read a passage.
Yeah.
So if somebody would text me one little verse
Mm-hmm.
as an encouragement, I could cling to that when my brain or even my eyes, wouldn't focus because they were so full of tears
Yes.
so long. I couldn't even focus. So little things. It's the little things
Mm-hmm.
that are saying, I just read this verse and it reminded me of you, or I just told so and so to pray. I had a girlfriend who sent me like a care package. She sent me this beautiful sweater because she knows I'm always cold. So,
Aw.
and if Bob was in the hospital, I was there with him.
Yeah.
Sent me an outfit knowing that I wasn't going home, very
Oh,
often. There was, a devotional. There were snacks. She knows Bob loves nuts. So she had a bunch of nuts in there.
so
And
thoughtful.
it was just little thoughtful
Mm-hmm.
things like that meant the world.
Mm-hmm.
So any little thing that we can do as friends to just show the love of Jesus
And that we're
is.
in that journey with the person, and that is the body of Christ, and how we're not called to suffer alone. We're called to be here in community for one another. And, going back to the beginning of the podcast and how intentional Bob is and you are and how strategic. I mean, for me, for sure, it makes sense as to why these people would fly in, because Bob has had such an impact on so many people's lives. And we haven't even touched upon the Barnabas Group, but for those people listening, Bob also started the Barnabas Group, which is a phenomenal organization that meets quarterly, spotlights several nonprofits, and allows people in the room to network with one another, and business people, nonprofits, pastors, whoever in that city, to hear the mission statement of that organization, and then to let those groups know how they feel called to support them or pray for them or financially invest or maybe be a part of their board, etc. But, the ripple effects of the Barnabas Group in people's careers and their families, a lot like the master's program, it's just profound. So it's very, makes a ton of sense why his following is so, so huge. And I love where you're both at right now, 18 months out from the diagnosis. And I've seen Bob speak at events, and, people are so grateful that he's again out on the speaking circuit, because he's not going to waste a day, and he wants to really redeem every moment that God's given him, as I know you do as well. So one other story I want you to share, because you have all these cool things that you guys have started, but just talk a little bit about the Safari Sisters. And I know that is a real passion of yours. You've got a cookbook as well. So, and we will have all of these links in the show notes. So if people, if they are interested in learning more about the master's program or the Barnabas Group or Safari Sisters, they'll be able to do that.
Well, I have this. It's so interesting because I'm, again, so selfish. I had always dreamed of going to Africa. That was one of my dreams. And Bob needed to go to Africa with Samaritan's Purse. He's been on the board with Samaritan's Purse forever. And so Africa, I wanted to go with. And on the way to what he needed to do, some South African friends of ours said, we've been involved with this ministry called Acres of Love for years. And as long as you are going through Johannesburg, and she knew I loved animals, and she said, I could get you in-country rates at a game lodge, and you could go on safari. She also knows I love a deal. And in-country rates, I get to go to Africa. I'm going to finally get most, yeah. So I got to Africa and obviously got to go on safari, and it was unbelievable. It was all my dreams come true. But the friend said, as long as you're there, I'd love for you to stop by and just see this little ministry. And at the time I think there were only 2 homes that are homes for abandoned AIDS and abandoned and abused, mostly HIV positive children orphaned due to AIDS in South Africa that have come from some of the terrible, terrible townships. Mm-hmm. And so no family, totally abandoned, some found by the side of the road as newborns. And I mean, just really tough situations. And so I said, of course, if that's what gets me the deal to get to safari. I'm so selfish.
You are not selfish.
I will go see, this ministry that she had been talking about. And these kids had me at the first hug. Mm-hmm. And I came home from that trip after meeting these precious children and hearing about this amazing ministry and seeing it firsthand. I came home, and of course, everybody's asking about, the animals. And I said, yeah, but that was incredible. But let me tell you about what these people are doing with a handful of children and 5 million orphans in the country of South Africa. Wow. I mean, what doing here is just incredible. And Acres of Love started by a business couple who saw the need and just started with one house with house parents and some orphaned children. And so when I came home and wanted to learn more about the ministry, the founder and her husband both started the master's program. And so I would, over lunch, say, Herda, tell us a story about one of the kids. And that would happen several times. And finally, I could tell that the other ladies in my group were being a little more interested mm-hmm. than at the past. So when we came back after lunch, I asked the group, I said, I think we need a field trip to South Africa. Anybody want to go with me? I'll make it happen. I had no idea what I was talking about. I'll make it happen if you guys want to go. There were 12 of us on that first trip, and I became, a de facto travel agent. Putting every
is that when the Safari Sisters was born at that moment?
Sisters, yes. Actually, he first thought he started calling us the Bush Babes, and then we appropriate, and so they started calling us Safari Sisters, and so that was, I think the first group I took was in 2006.
Okay.
And we came home from that trip, and the ladies all said, we have to do something. Because I came home that first trip saying, I have to do something. I had seen, I had traveled with Bob with Operation Christmas Child, Samaritan's Purse, and had
Mhm.
seen all sorts of children in desperate, war-torn countries, or natural disaster kind of situations, or extreme poverty. They always had at least one parent, though.
Mhm.
And what we saw in South Africa is these children, these babies had no parents at all. And so I just came home saying, I have to do
Have to
something.
do something. Mhm.
And so after that first trip of ladies, we all came home saying, we have to do something. Who's committed? Can we trust God for a really big dream that the 12 of us can gather enough funds, resources to buy another home that would have, 6
Mhm.
to 8 children in it? And we all said, let's go for it. And I think it was 7 months, within 7 months, we had raised the funds to buy a home, and then start raising the funds for the operating costs. And the baby slowly kind of just kept coming in,
Right.
and one of those little boys is already launched
Mhm.
and is independent now, but that's family to him. Since then, the Safari Sisters have purchased 5 homes now, and we provide the operating costs for those homes. And there are 41 homes now in
Wow.
Johannesburg and Cape Town, underneath the Acres of Love umbrella. And it's just amazing. Those are
So
all
amazing.
children,
I love
children
that.
that didn't have a chance
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
and now are given everything that we would give our own children. They're loving Jesus. They have these incredible house moms. They are given the best of medical care, the best of nutrition. These children will be the next generation of leaders in South Africa. They will be the pastors and the doctors and
Right. The
the
influencers. Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. So it's a real joy for me to see the fruit that has come from my selfish desire to see the animals of Africa. So I've taken probably 18, 19 different groups of ladies with me and expose them. And I always say, be prepared. You're
Mhm.
going to come, and your value system
Mhm.
will not be the same.
Right.
You're going to see a third world setting. And I do take them right into some of the places where policemen won't even follow criminals into. I just want them to see where these
Mhm.
kids have come
Mhm. Come from.
from. So much of the world lives like
Yes.
that. Our little bubble in the States is not the real
No.
world. And so to be able to show them what God is doing on the other side of the world, and to have their hearts changed and really captured with passion
Mhm.
for the realization that they can make a difference. They can make
Yes.
an
No, that's so beautiful, Cheri. And the statement about making a difference. I've been in groups before where people have said, "Oh, I feel so guilty that I live in Orange County." And there many decades ago there was kind of the message of, well, you should be a missionary, and if you're not a missionary overseas in the heart of Africa or Indonesia or wherever, like, then you're not living to your full potential. But that's just so not how God's wired everybody, because some people are wired to be the orthodontist and the electrician and the plumber and the lawyer. And we need those people in Orange County, for example. And if God is blessing them with the income, that's above and beyond their own needs, there's a purpose for that. And so to tie that into the person's heart, their passion, I've heard it said, like, where your passion intersects the pain of the world, like, can be your greatest contribution. And so rather than, feeling guilty that we're not living in the bush in Africa, instead it's like, no, okay, this is where you have put me. There's a verse, Acts 26:17. It's like, I have chosen the boundaries for you. This is where you should live and dwell and have your being. And okay, so this is where we are. The neighbors that live on either side are not a mistake. The city that we live in, all of that is, has been allowed and ordained. And so now what does he want us to do with that? And tied back to the beginning of the woman figuring out, the listener figuring out, what is my unique shape, my calling? And then, unexpectedly, you never even imagined this would be an area that you could leave such a lifelong legacy. So you've talked about, your grandchildren and your family, and doing the project of the 3-gen, 4-gen, which is so beautiful, and the legacy that will go on forever with that, as well as the Safari Sisters, Barnabas Group, Masters Program. That's why you're such a rock star, and that's why I wanted you on this podcast. So I know we're pretty much at time, that I like to ask at the end 3 B words. If you have a Bible verse that really is your favorite, any book you're currently reading, and then you mentioned bargains, and I'm also a really big bargain person. So if you have anything you want to share in those 3 categories, feel free.
Oh my gosh. Well, I believe it or not, I'm reading Randy Alcorn's book, Heaven, right now.
Love that book.
And it's been really fun for Bob and I to go through that. We actually, with another couple, we Zoom another couple that live out of state and are kind of doing a book club with them. And it's just, I'd read it years ago when it first came out, but to read it now from a different perspective has just been awesome. So I love everything Randy Alcorn writes, but I do think that we need to all be living with heaven in mind. And we don't. We make such a big deal about, all the little things
to distract us.
Like, oh yeah. And we're missing the big picture. So to be living life with eternity in mind is makes a difference in how we think, how we act, what we choose to do, how we choose to spend our time. So that's really important.
I agree.
Favorite verse. Obviously, this last year, my favorite verse has been, James 1, the first couple verses, to consider it pure joy, not if we face trials, but when we face trials. And how, and it's plural trials, not just one trial. We can expect trials in life. We can expect to go through storms. We can expect to go through the valley of the shadow of death, but God is going to be right there walking with us the whole time. And if we keep our eyes and our focus on Him, then this wonderful sense of strength and courage and peace, and it's almost an empowerment that comes with that makes you realize that you can face anything in the future. If God can get me through this, I don't fear the future at all.
Right. And it's a battle. And we wake up in the morning and pray for the strength to notice the battle, so we aren't just sort of blindsided by, how did that just happen? It's like, no, it's not a surprise. God knew. And okay, be with me in this trial that you're putting, because all of us have trials, maybe not quite as huge as what you and Bob walked through, but all of us listening have trials that we're walking through. Okay. And the bargain, any other bargains?
I'm trying to think. Well, I haven't had a whole lot of time to shop in the last 18 months. I love Marshalls.
Okay.
Laugh at it. But it's so funny because my kids will say, Mom, just say thank you when somebody compliments.
Right, instead of $5.
Yeah.
My kids say the same thing.
That I'm overboard on the whole deal. Anybody can go in and pay full price for something. I like the challenge of saying, I got this incredible whatever for this teeny tiny amount. So
same.
Yeah. Yes,
one thing I learned about Marshalls is the TJ Maxx gets the merchandise first, and then it goes to Marshalls. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. Did not know that.
Okay. I'm going to switch over to TJ Maxx then.
Then you might see it cheaper at Marshalls later. Well, this has been such a joy. I know we live 45 minutes apart from each other, and we're doing this on Zoom, but I feel like we've had a cup of coffee together in the same room. And thank you just for sharing your heart for being vulnerable, transparent with the journey that you walk through. And I know so many people are going to be encouraged to take the next step in their own lives. And I certainly was inspired and encouraged from the generosity side of things that you shared. I have a heart to, I was at a prayer center in Wales last year and would love to bring a small group of women there to experience that. It's called Faldy Brennan. And so you're motivating me to just kind of take that next step and figure it out, and it'll happen. And there we go. You know, because if I don't, it's not going to happen. So if that's how God's leading me, I need to do that. So
you go for it. You go for it. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it's such a blessing. Love you so much. Okay. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Generous Girl podcast. We're so glad that you're here. And if you know of someone that you think needs to be a guest on this podcast, please reach out to us. New episodes are released every other week, and you can follow us on YouTube and on all platforms. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.